A sharp crack of a gavel sliced through the courtroom. "Order!" the judge snapped, her voice echoing off the wood-paneled walls. Every head turned. At the center of the room, Daniel Hale leaned back in his chair, lips curled into a slow, satisfied smile, as if he were watching a performance written just for him. Across from him, Naomi Hale stood frozen beside her lawyer, her hands trembling so badly she had to clasp them together to keep them still. Daniel rose before anyone invited him to speak. "Your Honor," he said smoothly, adjusting the cuff of his tailored suit, "if I may clarify something." The judge frowned. "Mr. Hale, you will wait for—" Daniel didn't wait. "My wife," he continued loudly, glancing back at Naomi, "has always struggled to understand, well, anything involving responsibility, finances, legal documents, reality." A ripple of murmurs swept through the courtroom. Naomi's lawyer shot to his feet. "Objection!" "Overruled," the judge said after a brief pause. "But keep it brief, Mr. Hale." Daniel nodded, pretending gratitude, though his eyes gleamed with something darker. He turned fully towards Naomi now, pacing slowly as though he owned the floor beneath him. "For 12 years, I provided everything, the house, the cars, the accounts. All she had to do was sign where I told her to sign and stay out of the way." Naomi's breath caught. Her chest tightened as though invisible hands were squeezing her lungs. Daniel chuckled softly. "And now she wants half of what she didn't earn." A few people in the gallery laughed. The sound felt like knives. Naomi stared at the floor, her vision blurring. She could still hear his voice, each word landing with deliberate cruelty. "She didn't work, didn't invest, didn't build anything. She barely finished college, Your Honor. I'm honestly impressed she made it this far without getting lost." More laughter, louder this time. The judge rapped her gavel once, but she didn't look particularly displeased. "Mr. Hale, focus on the financial dispute." Daniel nodded again. "Of course, financially speaking, Naomi Hale contributed nothing. She signed a prenuptial agreement of her own free will, clear, legal, witnessed." He turned back to the bench. "I'm simply asking that the court respect the law and common sense." Naomi's lawyer leaned towards her, whispering urgently, "You need to respond. Say something." Her mouth opened. Nothing came out. Her throat felt sealed shut, her mind screaming while her body refused to cooperate. The room felt too large, too bright, every eye on her like a spotlight. Daniel noticed. He always did. "That silence," he said, spreading his hands, "that's what I dealt with for years. No opinions, no ideas, just emptiness." Naomi flinched. Memories crashed over her in fragments. Daniel standing over her with documents, his voice gentle but firm. "Just sign, Naomi. It's standard. Everyone does it." Late nights when she asked questions and he sighed as if she were a child, slowing him down. "Mrs. Hale," the judge said sharply, "do you wish to respond to your husband's statements?" Naomi swallowed hard. Her lips trembled. Her voice cracked, the sound barely audible. "I trusted him." Daniel laughed outright. "Your Honor, trust isn't a legal argument." The judge sighed. "Mrs. Hale, do you have evidence of coercion, duress, anything that would invalidate the agreement?" Naomi looked at her lawyer. He hesitated. Daniel saw that hesitation and pounced. "Let me save the court some time. She doesn't, because there was none." He turned again towards Naomi, his voice dropping, sharpened just enough to cut. "You signed because you knew you couldn't survive without me." That did it. Tears spilled down Naomi's cheeks, silent but unstoppable. Her shoulders shook as she tried to steady herself, humiliation burning through her veins. The gallery watched with a mixture of pity and judgment. The judge leaned back. "If there are no further witnesses—" "Wait." The word came out hoarse, barely more than a whisper. Naomi lifted her head. Daniel turned slowly, eyebrows raised in mock surprise. "Oh, you found your voice?" She took a shaky breath. I have one witness. The courtroom stirred. Her lawyer stared at her. Naomi, we discussed. I have a witness, she repeated louder this time, though her hands still trembled. Daniel scoffed. Who? Your yoga instructor? The neighbor who borrowed sugar once? A few snickers followed. The judge rapped her gavel once, but she didn't look particularly displeased. Mrs. Hale, call your witness. Naomi hesitated. Her heart pounded so hard she thought it might burst through her ribs. She glanced toward the back of the courtroom. The doors were closed. Her lawyer leaned closer, panic creeping into his voice. Naomi, if no one shows up, the judge will not look kindly on this. Daniel crossed his arms, grinning. By all means, let's see this mystery witness. Seconds ticked by. 10, 20. A bead of sweat slid down Naomi's spine. Doubt crept in, sharp and cruel. What if she doesn't come? The judge sighed. Mrs. Hale, if your witness is not present. The heavy courtroom doors creaked. Every head turned. The doors opened slowly, deliberately. An older woman stepped inside. She wore a simple dark coat, her gray hair pulled neatly back. No jewelry, no dramatic entrance, just calm, measured steps that echoed across the silent room. Daniel glanced over his shoulder and snorted. You've got to be kidding me. Naomi's breath hitched. The older woman met her eyes across the room, and for the first time that day, Naomi felt something other than shame. She felt steady. The older woman stopped at the aisle, her gaze lifting towards the judge. My name, she said evenly, is Ruth Coleman. Daniel laughed under his breath. Of course it is. The judge leaned forward. And your relation to the respondent. Ruth's eyes flicked briefly at Daniel, then back to Naomi. I'm her mother. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Daniel shook his head, smiling wide, already victorious. Your Honor, with all due respect, this is a divorce court, not a family therapy session. The judge raised her gavel again, studying Ruth carefully. Mrs. Coleman, what exactly are you here to testify about? Ruth took one more step forward. Her voice didn't rise, it didn't shake. I'm here, she said, enough to be heard, to explain why everything Mr. Hale just told this court is a lie. And for the first time since the hearing began, Daniel Hale's smile faltered. The judge studied Ruth Coleman for a long moment, her expression unreadable. A lie is a serious accusation, she said. You'll need to be very specific, Mrs. Coleman. Ruth nodded once. I intend to be. Daniel leaned back again, recovering quickly. Your Honor, this is absurd. She's her mother. Of course she'll say whatever she thinks helps. Ruth didn't look at him. Not yet. Mrs. Coleman, the judge continued. Before we proceed, I need to ask, what is your occupation? Ruth paused just long enough for the courtroom to lean in. I'm a retired constitutional law professor. I taught for 32 years. I specialized in contract law, marital property, and coercion statutes. The reaction was instant. Whispers turned into gasps. Naomi's lawyer stiffened, eyes widening as he slowly turned to stare at Ruth. Naomi herself felt the air leave her lungs. She hadn't heard her mother describe herself like that in years, not once since she retired, not once during the long, quiet stretches of distance between them. Daniel blinked. Once. Then he laughed, sharp and dismissively. That's convenient. Ruth finally turned her head toward him. Her gaze was steady, almost clinical. So is ignorance, yet you've relied on it for years. A few people in the gallery murmured. The judge raised her hand, silencing them. Mrs. Coleman, the judge said, her tone noticeably more attentive. You may proceed, but understand this court will not tolerate grandstanding. Ruth inclined her head. Of course. She clasped her hands behind her back, pacing slowly, not nervously, but thoughtfully. Mr. Hale claims my daughter signed a prenuptial agreement willingly. He claims she understood its implications. He claims she was free of pressure. She stopped and faced the bench. Every one of those claims is false. Daniel's lawyer stood. Objection. Opinion. Ruth turned slightly toward him. No, she said, unruffled. Fact. The judge hesitated, then nodded. Overruled. Continue. Daniel shifted in his seat. Ruth reached into her bag and removed a slim folder. She handed it to the bailiff, who passed it to the judge. That, Ruth said, is a timeline. Dates, locations, witnesses. It documents when the agreement was presented, revised, and signed. The judge flipped through the pages. Ruth continued, her voice even. On the night Naomi signed that document, she had been awake for nearly 20 hours. Mr. Hale had delayed the signing until after midnight. He told her the wedding would be canceled the next morning if she didn't sign. Daniel scoffed. That's ridiculous. Ruth's eyes snapped to him. You texted her that exact sentence at 11:43 p.m. The courtroom went dead silent. Daniel's lawyer froze. The judge looked up sharply. Mrs. Coleman, do you have proof of that message? Ruth nodded. Yes. Screenshots extracted from Naomi's old phone, verified by a digital forensic analyst. The metadata is intact. Naomi's hands flew to her mouth. She hadn't known her mother still had those records, hadn't known anyone did. Daniel leaned forward now. That doesn't prove coercion. Couples argue before weddings all the time. Indeed, Ruth said, but threats tied directly to legal compliance meet the statutory definition of duress in this jurisdiction. She recited the statute number from memory. The judge's lips parted slightly. Daniel's lawyer whispered frantically to him. We didn't know about this. Daniel hissed back. She's bluffing. Ruth wasn't finished. Furthermore, she said, the agreement itself violates disclosure requirements. Mr. Hale failed to list 3 investment accounts, 2 holding companies, and 1 offshore trust. Daniel shot to his feet. That's confidential business information. The judge slammed her gavel. Sit down, Mr. Hale. Ruth's voice didn't waver. Those omissions invalidate informed consent, which, for someone who prides himself on intelligence, is a glaring oversight. The gallery buzzed. Naomi felt tears slide down her face again, but these were different. Her chest ached, not from shame, but from something loosening, something finally lifting. Daniel's lawyer stood again, his face pale. We request a recess. The judge shook her head slowly. Denied. I want to hear where this is going. Ruth inclined her head. Of course. She clasped her hands behind her back, pacing slowly. Not nervously, but thoughtfully. There's more, she said. Daniel's composure cracked. Of course there is. Ruth reached into her folder again and withdrew another document. This, she said, is a letter Mr. Hale sent to Naomi's former employer 6 years ago. Naomi stiffened. What? Ruth looked at her daughter briefly, regret flickering across her face. You never saw it. She turned back to the judge. In this letter, Mr. Hale implied Naomi was emotionally unstable and unreliable, encouraging her employer to let her focus on being a wife. Daniel shouted, That was for her own good. The judge's voice cut like steel. Mr. Hale, one more outburst and I will hold you in contempt. Ruth continued. After that letter, Naomi lost her job. She became financially dependent, which Mr. Hale now uses as evidence of her incompetence. Naomi's knees nearly buckled. Her lawyer reached out, steadying her. I didn't know, Naomi whispered. Ruth's voice softened for the first time. I know. The courtroom felt heavy, charged, as if everyone were holding their breath. The judge removed her glasses, rubbing the bridge of her nose. Mrs. Coleman, why bring this now? Why not earlier? Why not during the marriage? Ruth hesitated. For the first time, emotion cracked through her composed exterior. Because my daughter needed to know her own strength, she said quietly,
And because I hoped he would never force this moment. Daniel laughed bitterly. So this is revenge. Ruth met his gaze without flinching. No, this is accountability. The judge sat up straighter. Mrs. Coleman, based on what you've presented, this court has serious concerns about the validity of the prenuptial agreement. Daniel's face drained of color. The judge continued, I am ordering an immediate suspension of enforcement pending full review. The gallery erupted. Daniel slammed his fist on the table. You can't do that! The eyes hardened. I just did. Naomi swayed, overwhelmed. Her lawyer whispered, awestruck, This changes everything. Daniel stared at Ruth now, his voice low and furious. You think you've won. Ruth didn't raise her voice. I think, she said, you finally understand what it feels like to be powerless. Daniel opened his mouth to respond, and the judge spoke first. Mr. Hale, before this hearing continues, I need to ask you something. Daniel swallowed. Yes, Your Honor. Have you ever instructed your wife to sign legal documents without independent counsel? Daniel hesitated. Just a fraction of a second. It was enough. The judge leaned forward. Answer the question. Naomi's heart pounded. Daniel's lawyer whispered urgently, Daniel. Daniel straightened. Yes. The word echoed. Ruth closed her eyes. The judge's voice was quiet now, dangerous. Then this court has a much bigger problem than a divorce. And somewhere deep in the room, Naomi felt the balance of power shift completely.
The room seemed to shrink around Daniel as the judge's words settled like a weight on his chest. A much bigger problem? He repeated, forcing a laugh that sounded thin even to his own ears. Your Honor, surely this is being taken out of context. The judge didn't smile. Context is exactly what I'm interested in now. She turned to Naomi. Mrs. Hale, did you ever have independent legal counsel when you signed documents presented by your husband? Naomi's fingers tightened around the edge of the table. Her voice trembled, but it didn't disappear this time. No, she said. He told me lawyers were unnecessary. He said they would only confuse me. Daniel snapped his head toward her. That's not what I said. Ruth's gaze flicked to him. You said they'll just tell you things that make you anxious. I wrote it down. Daniel's mouth opened, then closed. The judge exhaled slowly. Mr. Hale, do you deny making that statement? Daniel glanced at his lawyer. The lawyer's eyes screamed warning. I don't recall, Daniel said carefully. The judge nodded once. Convenient. A low murmur rippled through the gallery again. Someone in the back whispered, Oh my God. Ruth stepped forward slightly. Your Honor, if I may add something. The judge gestured. Go on. For years, Ruth said, my daughter believed her silence was peace, that if she didn't argue, didn't question, didn't insist, she was being supportive. Naomi's chest tightened. She remembered every swallowed thought, every time she convinced herself that love meant shrinking. Daniel scoffed. She was happy. Ruth turned fully toward him now, her voice still controlled but sharper. No, she was obedient. There's a difference. Daniel slammed his palm on the table. That's enough. The judge's gavel struck immediately. Mr. Hale, you are perilously close to contempt. Daniel leaned back, breathing hard. Ruth continued, unfazed. Mr. Hale also claims Naomi lacks intelligence, that she barely finished college. She reached into her folder again. These are Naomi's transcripts, Ruth said, handing them forward. She graduated with honors. She left a promising career in research after Mr. Hale insisted she focus on the marriage. Naomi stared at the documents as if seeing them for the first time. She hadn't thought about that version of herself in years.
Daniel shook his head bitterly. So now you're rewriting history. No, Ruth said softly. I'm reading it. The judge studied the transcripts. Her expression changed, subtly but unmistakably. Mrs. Hale, why did you agree to leave your job? Naomi hesitated, then spoke. He said one of us needed to be available, that his work was more important, that mine was a hobby. Daniel muttered, It was. Naomi's voice cracked. It mattered to me. The room went quiet. Ruth watched her daughter with something like pride and pain mixed together. Your Honor, Ruth said, this is not just a matter of money. It's a pattern, isolation, dependency, control. Daniel laughed sharply. Now I'm an abuser? The judge looked at him coldly. No one has used that word, yet. Daniel's lawyer leaned in urgently. We need a recess. This is spiraling. The judge shook her head again. No, we are continuing. She turned to Ruth. You said there was more. Ruth nodded. Yes. She removed one final document from her folder. This, she said, is a revised version of the prenuptial agreement, dated 2 days before the wedding. Daniel stiffened. You never showed Naomi this version, Ruth continued, but you filed it. Daniel stood up abruptly. That's impossible. Ruth met his eyes. It's your signature. The judge's eyebrows shot up. Mrs. Coleman. The version Naomi signed granted her limited spousal support. The version Mr. Hale filed erased it entirely. The courtroom exploded. What? Naomi gasped, turning to Daniel. That's not true. The judge snapped. Sit down. Daniel dropped into his chair, his hands shaking. Ruth's voice cut through the chaos. That is fraud. Naomi felt dizzy. Her lawyer stared at the document, then up at Daniel, then back at the judge. Your Honor, he said slowly, if this is accurate. The judge raised a hand. I'm aware. She turned to Daniel. Mr. Hale, did you alter a legal agreement after your wife signed? Daniel's jaw worked. No. Ruth spoke immediately. A handwriting analyst confirmed the alterations, and the filing timestamp places it after Naomi left the office. The judge closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them, the air felt different, heavier, final. This court, she said, is no longer convinced Mr. Hale has acted in good faith at any point during these proceedings. Daniel's lawyer stood. Your Honor, sit, the judge snapped. I'm not finished. She turned to Naomi now, her voice gentler. Mrs. Hale, I need you to listen carefully. Naomi nodded, tears streaming freely now. Based on testimony presented today, this court is invalidating the prenuptial agreement pending a full forensic audit of Mr. Hale's finances. Daniel shot to his feet. You can't. Sit. He sat. The judge continued. Furthermore, this court is referring evidence of potential fraud and coercion to the appropriate authorities. A gasp swept through the room. Naomi covered her mouth, sobbing silently. Daniel's lawyer slumped back into his chair, defeated. Daniel stared straight ahead, his face pale, his earlier arrogance nowhere to be found. Ruth closed her eyes, exhaling slowly, not in triumph, but relief. The judge struck her gavel. This hearing is adjourned for today. As people began to stand, the gallery buzzed with whispered disbelief. Naomi felt her knees weaken. She reached for the table, but Ruth was there instantly, steadying her. I didn't know, Naomi whispered through tears. I didn't know any of this. Ruth's voice was soft now, just for her. That was the point. Daniel turned as they moved away, his voice low, venomous. You think this is over? Ruth paused and looked back at him. No, she said quietly. Now it's honest. Naomi followed her mother toward the exit, every step feeling surreal, like walking out of a storm she hadn't realized she was trapped inside. Behind them, Daniel remained seated alone, the courtroom that once laughed with him, now filled with strangers who wouldn't meet his eyes. And for the first time in 12 years, Naomi felt something unfamiliar settle into her bones. Freedom.
The hallway outside the courtroom buzzed with voices, cameras flashing as reporters surged forward, but Naomi barely noticed them. Her ears rang, her heart still racing as if the gavel had struck inside her chest instead of on wood. "Mrs. Hale? Naomi, how does it feel?" someone shouted. "Is it true the prenup was fraudulent? Did your husband really alter the documents?" Her lawyer stepped in front of her, raising a hand. No comments. Ruth placed a steadying hand on Naomi's back, guiding her through the chaos. Her touch was firm, grounding. Naomi whispered, "I can't believe he did that." Ruth didn't answer right away. They reached the quieter end of the corridor, where the marble walls swallowed sound. Only then did Ruth speak. "Believe it, but don't let it define you." Naomi looked at her mother, eyes red, face exhausted. "Why didn't you tell me? All these years, why didn't you tell me who you were, what you knew?" Ruth sighed, the weight of decades settling into that breath. "Because knowledge doesn't mean strength until you're ready to use it. I worried that if I fought your battles too early, you'd never know you could survive them." Naomi swallowed. "I didn't feel strong." Ruth met her gaze. "You stood up today when everything told you to stay quiet. That's strength." Down the hall, Daniel emerged from the courtroom, his lawyer walking several steps ahead of him, already on his phone. The reporters swarmed Daniel too now, microphones thrust toward his face. "Mr. Hale, do you have a response to the fraud allegations? Are federal investigators getting involved?" Daniel's jaw was clenched tight. He said nothing, not a single word. His eyes flicked to Naomi. For the first time, there was no mockery there, no superiority, only fury, and something else. Fear. Naomi didn't look away. Daniel took a step toward her, his lawyer spinning around instantly. "Daniel, don't!" "Naomi," Daniel said, his voice low, "we need to talk." Ruth moved slightly, placing herself between them without raising her voice. "Anything you have to say can go through counsel." Daniel laughed bitterly. "You planned this." Ruth shook her head. "You forced it." He looked past her, locking onto Naomi again. "You let her do this?" Naomi's voice surprised even herself when it came out steady. "No, you did." Daniel's mouth twitched. "You think this ends well for you?" Naomi felt her fear rise, but it didn't control her. "I think it ends honestly, for the first time." Daniel stared at her as if she were a stranger. Maybe she was. A uniformed officer approached Daniel, clearing his throat. "Mr. Hale, we'll need you to come with us to answer a few questions." Daniel froze. "Now?" "Yes, now." The officer's presence wasn't aggressive, but it was firm, unavoidable. The reporters exploded again. "Is this an arrest? Are you being detained, Mr. Hale?" Daniel glanced once more at Naomi, his face pale beneath the fluorescent lights. Then he turned and followed the officer down the hall. The sound of his footsteps faded. Naomi exhaled, long and shaky, like she'd been holding her breath for years. Her lawyer approached, still in disbelief. "I've been practicing law for 20 years. I've never seen a reversal like that." Ruth allowed herself a small, tired smile. Truth has a way of insisting. Outside, the afternoon light felt blinding. Naomi squinted as they stepped onto the courthouse steps, the cold air filling her lungs. For a moment, neither she nor Ruth spoke. Then Naomi laughed softly, incredulous. "I walked in there thinking I'd lose everything." Ruth glanced at her. "You walked out with yourself." Naomi nodded. tears threatening again. I don't know what happens next. Ruth squeezed her hand. Neither did I when I started over. Naomi hesitated. Is that why you stopped practicing? Ruth looked ahead, her expression distant. Partly. After your father died, the world felt loud. I needed quiet. I needed to remember who I was without the courtroom. Naomi swallowed. I wish I'd known you better. Ruth turned to her fully now. We have time. Those words landed softly, but they carried more promise than anything Daniel had ever said. Months later, the silence in Naomi's new apartment felt strange. No tension, no waiting for footsteps, no calculating moods. Just quiet. Boxes sat half unpacked, sunlight spilling across the floor. Naomi stood by the window, holding her phone as it buzzed with another notification. Assets frozen, pending investigation. She let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. There were more updates, more hearings scheduled, investigators digging deeper, accounts that didn't add up, deals unraveling. Daniel's name appeared in headlines now, followed by words like alleged, under scrutiny, and fraud. The same people who once laughed now shook their heads. Naomi turned the phone face down. She didn't need to watch him fall. A knock sounded at the door. She opened it to find Ruth holding 2 cups of coffee. I thought you might need this, Ruth said. Naomi smiled. You're learning my habits. Ruth stepped inside, looking around. It suits you. Naomi glanced at the bare walls, the mismatched furniture. It's not much. It's yours. They sat together in the quiet, sipping coffee. After a moment, Naomi said, He always said I'd be nothing without him. Ruth met her eyes. And now? Naomi thought of the courtroom, the silence before the doors opened, the moment she spoke up. I think, she said slowly, I was never nothing. I was just surrounded by someone who needed me to believe that. Ruth smiled, pride softening her features. Months later, the final ruling came down. The prenup was formally voided. Naomi was awarded her fair share. Additional charges were filed against Daniel for document tampering and financial misrepresentation. He didn't attend the hearing. Naomi did. She sat quietly in the courtroom, no longer shrinking, no longer invisible. When it was over, she didn't wait for applause or attention. She walked out calmly, her head high. Outside, the sky was clear. Ruth joined her on the steps. It's done, Naomi said. Ruth nodded. 1 chapter. Naomi looked out at the street, the people passing by, unaware of how much her life had changed inside those walls. Thank you, she said softly. Ruth shook her head. You don't thank someone for telling the truth. You honor it by living well. Naomi smiled, feeling something settle inside her. Not triumph, not revenge, but peace. They had laughed at her in court. They had underestimated her silence. But when the doors opened and the truth walked in, everything changed. And this time, Naomi didn't need anyone else to stand for her. She stood on her own.